I caught my wife cheating during one of her writing seminars. Hired a private investigator, got the proof I needed, and disappeared without a trace before she came back home. My name's Andrew Baker, but my friends call me Abe, never Andy. There's always some tipsy stranger at a bar who thinks we're buddies and throws out an Andy like we're lifelong pals. "Andy, what do you do?" they ask. I usually just grin and say, "I designed this cool little gadget. Cops use it to check if someone's drunk from 40 feet away. They're putting them on speed radars all over the city now." That's usually where the conversation ends. In case you're wondering, the gadget's not real. I've got zero tolerance for stupidity, and I won't waste time explaining the joke to anyone who doesn't catch on. Lie to me once, and things only get worse from there. I'm just a regular guy, living a simple life and finding satisfaction in my work. I'm an engineer at a big national company with offices across the country. I've got friends, and while I'm not a heavy drinker, I'll grab a beer with them now and then. Oh, and nachos. I've got a weakness for nachos. If I'm not careful, I'll pack on the pounds fast, so I try to stay in shape at least as much as a guy my age can. I used to go sailing every chance I got. But you know how it is, a wife and two little girls take up most of your free time. Eventually, I sold the boat, one of those compromises you make over the years to be with the people who really matter. I've been happily married to Karen for 25 years now. She's a schoolteacher. Our two daughters are off at college. Claire's at Brown University up in Rhode Island, and her younger sister Denise is at Boston University. I probably couldn't afford tuition at those fancy schools, but thankfully my girls are smart. They worked hard and earned themselves impressive scholarships. We live in North Carolina, in a place known as the Research Triangle. It's a great area, full of top-notch universities and tech companies. Honestly, it's a fantastic place to live and work. I was a little disappointed when the girls decided to head up north for school, but I get it. They needed to step out of their comfort zone. In the end, it's been good for them. Our daughters are bright, funny, charming young women with strong values. I worry about them every day, but I trust their judgment. Watching them grow and take their first steps into independence meant that Karen and I finally had time to ourselves again. I've been looking forward to that for a while. With both girls in college, I picture coming home every night to my loving wife with the two of us focusing on each other for the first time in years. I imagine we'd reconnect like a second honeymoon. Dinners out, going to the theater, catching a movie, rediscovering each other the way I'd always hoped we would. But reality didn't quite match the picture I had in my head. Looking back on that first year with an empty house, I realized Karen had started to change. At first, it was subtle little things here and there. But over time, those changes became more noticeable. I thought maybe she was just finding new interests now that the girls were gone. I figured it was her way of growing into this new phase of life. But eventually, it hit me. I was watching her shift in ways that went deeper than just hobbies or personal growth. Karen teaches English and specializes in creative writing. If I'm being fair, she's always dreamed of being a writer herself. When Karen was a young mother and teacher, she never really had the chance to write the way she wanted to. In the summers or during the rare spare hour, she'd sit down and try, but nothing significant ever came of it. She'd submit essays and short stories to literary magazines, only to collect rejection after rejection. That great masterpiece she dreamed of, it never quite materialized. I'll admit, I enjoy reading her work. But as a writer, Karen never strayed far from predictable, sometimes overly dramatic stories. She's got this romanticized view of what a writer should be, and to be honest, I think she's more in love with the idea of being a writer than the actual writing itself. Still, if it makes her happy, then that's good enough for me. For most of our marriage, Karen's been part of different writing groups. It's a gathering of people who critique each other's work, offer suggestions, and have long discussions aimed at improving everyone's craft. Some of these groups seemed useful. Others? Well, they felt more like mutual admiration societies. The last group she joined, the one where things started to go sideways, was a mix of both. They'd rotate hosting duties, and when it was our turn, I did my best to stay out of their way. I tried sitting in once, but Karen and a couple of the others weren't exactly thrilled about it, so I didn't push. Karen's current writing group is made up of about 10 people, men and women. Some of them I like just fine. Others I wouldn't miss if they stopped showing up. Half of them are forgettable, and the other half leave an impression. Take Reggie, for example. She's into historical writing and biographies. She does real research and writes these academic-style books that somehow manage to stay interesting. I've read all of them and enjoyed each one. Then there's Betty. She's all about fantasy. I doubt she sees herself as the next Rowling. Her stories lean more toward talking unicorns and whimsical adventures. Friendly woman, and I get the sense she writes purely for the fun of it. Bell? He's the know-it-all of the group. His constant need to explain everything wears thin pretty fast, but otherwise he seems all right. And then there's Frank. From the moment I met him, something felt off. That uneasy feeling hasn't left since. The first time we crossed paths, he looked me over and said, "So, Eddie, what do you do for work?" I glanced at Karen, who frowned slightly and shook her head just enough for me to notice. "I'm an engineer," I replied. Did he smile? Or was it more of a smirk? I already mentioned I stopped trying to sit in on their group, figured it was easier to stay in the background. When they met at our house, I'd usually be in the next room working quietly or out on the back porch, just within earshot. Most of the time, they forgot I was even there. Early on, I noticed something about Frank and Karen. Whenever they talked, there was this familiarity. Private jokes, little shared glances. It made me uncomfortable. Sometimes he'd encourage her, and other times it was like he could read her mind. I didn't like that one bit. He'd bring up past conversations that seemed like they were just between the two of them. The rest of the group rarely chimed in, like they weren't part of those moments. It was just a feeling, but it gnawed at me. I brought it up to Karen, but she brushed it off. I've learned not to push too hard. I said my piece. The rest was up to her. Their meetings followed a routine. They'd critique, discuss, and eventually relax with a glass of wine. It was during one of these post-discussion moments in early March that I started to see the cracks. They drifted into a conversation about the lifestyles of famous writers. Oh, all the greats were alcoholics, right? They wrote in the mornings, then drank in the afternoons and evenings. It relaxes the mind and opens it to new ideas. By morning, those creative thoughts flow, and they're ready to write, Frank said, leaning back in his chair like he was schooling the rest of the group. And let's not forget, all truly successful writers had romantic affairs. That's what really fueled their creativity. That's when Karen's words hit me like a punch to the gut. Oh, absolutely. It's all about the intensity, that sharp thrill of the unknown, the excitement of keeping it hidden from everyone else. That's where real inspiration lies. Some of the others chuckled, while a few stayed quiet. I told myself it was just a joke, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I stayed tuned in for the rest of the evening, listening closely from the other room. Maybe we should all have a night of passion and see who writes the next great American novel, Bill chimed in. I wasn't sure if he was joking or testing the waters. The conversation drifted back to drinking and affairs among famous writers. Meanwhile, I sat there silently, eavesdropping, feeling more like a stranger in my own home. That's when something else caught my attention. Anyone else thinking of applying for that writer's seminar in Illinois this summer? Frank asked, casually throwing it out there. Oh, I already did, Karen replied eagerly. I really hope I get accepted. 6 whole weeks devoted to writing and talking shop with other writers. This could be a real breakthrough for me. That was the first I'd heard of it. Frank jumped right in. I'm sure you'll get in. Your writing's come so far this past year. I believe in you. I applied too, but I'm not sure I'll make the cut. My internal radar was blaring. Seriously, Frank, since when are you so humble? I didn't like what I was hearing, but at the time, I still loved and trusted my wife. When you've been married as long as I have, trust becomes the bedrock of your life. You don't ask yourself, is she up to something? The thought doesn't even cross your mind. Marriage is a partnership. Your spouse is your other half. Year after year, Karen had shown her loyalty. All I wanted was for her to succeed and be happy. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But that trust? It crumbled fast when you realized it was all just smoke. Time passed, and I let that overheard conversation slip to the back of my mind. Like I said, I trusted Karen completely. Young guys might not get it, but when you've been married for over 20 years, trust isn't a choice. It's just the way things are. By late April, I'd practically forgotten the whole thing. I'd spent the afternoon working in the yard and was heading back inside. As I reached the kitchen door, I overheard Karen on the phone. I can't wait. 6 weeks with no obligations, no worries, and no one waiting on me to come home. That last part stopped me in my tracks. I froze by the door and listened, heart hammering in my chest. Absolutely. This is going to be the most selfish 6 weeks of my life. I deserve it. And so do you. I didn't like the sound of any of that. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. Karen nearly jumped out of her skin. "Oh, I've got to go, Abe," she said, hanging up abruptly. "Time to get dinner started." "Who was that?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Oh, just Reggie. We were talking about the school year wrapping up soon." "Yeah, sure." I wanted to press her, ask about what she'd said, especially the part about no one waiting on her to come home. But something told me I wouldn't get the truth that night. I bit my tongue and let it slide, but my mood had soured. Later that evening, Karen lit up like she'd won the lottery. "Abe, you won't believe the news. Remember that writer's seminar in Illinois I applied for?" I raised an eyebrow. "No, you never listened to me," she teased. Honestly, I had already heard about the seminar. I'd overheard the group talking about it the month before. But I didn't remember Karen ever mentioning it to me directly. "Oh yeah, I applied for that 6-week writer's seminar. It runs from mid-June to the end of July at the University of Illinois. They have lectures from professors and bring in famous writers for workshops and group discussions. Then we just write. It's such an amazing opportunity, and I got accepted," she said, beaming. "That's wonderful, honey. I'm sure we can manage it financially," I replied, forcing a smile. "Maybe I'll take some time off and come with you. I'd love to sit in on a few of those lectures." Her reaction surprised me. "Oh, we can talk about it," she said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "It'll be really intense, though, 6 weeks of nonstop writing. I probably won't have much free time to spend with you." That little alarm bell in my head went off again. "Well, you know me," I said with a chuckle. "I'm low maintenance. I could be the guy brewing coffee for the group." She laughed nervously. "That could be sweet, Abe. Let's see how things go." I'd heard excuses like that before. I knew what it meant. She was already planning ways to make sure I didn't go to Illinois with her. "It kind of sounds like you don't want me to come," I said, watching her closely. "Oh no, that's not it at all," Karen replied, shaking her head. "I just think you get bored. You're into computers and circuits. Abe, this is just writers rambling about big ideas." I didn't say anything, but in my mind, I was shouting loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "I'm not stupid, Karen." "Oh, I didn't mean it like that," she added quickly. "I just mean your brain's wired for details. Writers are more philosophical." I let it slide. I knew she was trying to shut me out. "I'm sure you'll do great," I said, swallowing the truth. Later that night, after Karen had gone to bed, I sat down at the computer. AT&T offers an online log of incoming and outgoing calls. I pulled up our phone records. The call I interrupted earlier wasn't from Reggie. Or if it was, it came from Frank's phone. Funny how trust, built over 25 years of marriage, can come crashing down with just a glance at a phone log. Weeks passed, and Karen seemed completely consumed by the seminar. Every time I brought up the idea of visiting her or going with her, she brushed it aside. At first, she was polite about it, but when I wouldn't drop it, she shifted to manipulation. "Abe, I have amazing news," she announced one evening. "I bought you and Jake tickets for a fishing camp in northern Canada at the end of June. You can take Jake, and you two can finally catch those big brown trout you're always talking about." It was pricey, but I wanted to show you how much I appreciate your understanding about the seminar. I felt bad about you missing out, so I figured this would be the perfect way for you to relax too. Something about the whole thing felt off. "Thank you, honey. That's thoughtful," I said, hiding my suspicion. "But honestly, I'd rather spend that time with you." "Abe, we've been over this," she replied with a sigh. "It just doesn't make sense. I'll be busy the whole time, and I'd feel terrible if I couldn't spend any time with you." I studied her face, searching her eyes for something. Was that condescension? "Thank you, dear. Canada sounds great," I said flatly. In my mind, the gears were already turning. Illinois was the real destination. "Well, you could at least look a little excited. Those tickets weren't cheap. Abe, I want you to have a good time." "Of course. Sounds fun." I spent the rest of the evening in the basement, tinkering with a project and letting my thoughts run wild. Our house is old. It still has a cast iron floor grate in the hallway, part of the original heating system. At some point, I'd stopped noticing it. But now, I found myself listening carefully as Karen talked on the phone upstairs. Yeah, I gave him the tickets. He's still unsure. I don't know. I keep telling him he won't enjoy it. No, I can't just tell him not to come. I understand. I want this too, but I also want to keep my marriage intact. I just need him to give me some space so I can enjoy myself for a few weeks. I deserve this. I earned this. Yes, I want to spend those weeks with you too. Let's just wait a little longer. I think he'll get the message. All right, love you too. Write something amazing for me tonight. She hung up. I sat in the basement, heart pounding, with a lump in my throat. I'm not an idiot. Either Karen was already having an affair, or she was seriously considering it. In any case, what I overheard demanded answers. It took me about 20 minutes to gather my thoughts, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to become the kind of liar I despised, at least for a while. I needed to hide my intentions until I could figure out a plan. I called upstairs in my warmest voice. Karen, I'm heading over to Jake's to tell him the good news. Oh, that's wonderful, honey. Have fun, she replied, as casually as if nothing had happened. And just like that, I was out the basement door. I needed space. Visiting Jake was just an excuse. I wasn't ready to confront Karen yet. I needed someone to talk to, and Jake had been my closest friend since we were kids. You're kidding, right? Jake said, always the blunt one. No way. She'd never cheat on you, Abe. She's clearly trying to keep me away from this seminar, and she's calling someone baby. That sure as hell isn't me. We sat there in silence for a while. That's what most guys need from a friend. Just someone to sit there and share the weight of it. You got to talk to her, Abe. You can't live the next few months assuming the worst without knowing the truth, Jake finally said. And what you gonna say? Think about it. If I check the phone logs tonight, do you really think it won't be Frank she was talking to? You think I won't find out that he's the one she's been calling baby and making plans with? I wouldn't bet against it. So, what's your plan? Jake asked, leaning forward. I'm gonna sit down with her and just be honest. That's what you do after 25 years together. I'll tell her I love her, that I'm hurt she doesn't want me at this seminar. I'll ask her straight out what's going on. If she's planning something, I need to know why she doesn't want me there. You think she'll tell you the truth? No, but I'll tell her the truth, even if she doesn't like hearing it. She needs to know how much I love her. She needs to understand that if she cheats, it'll destroy everything we've built. I bet she'll try to convince me I'm imagining things and just send me off to that fishing trip. But I'll know. I paused. By the way, I've got 2 tickets for that Canadian fishing camp at the end of June. One of them's got your name on it. Jake cracked a smile. Sounds good. I mean, I'm here for you, man. I laughed. Jake was always loyal, the kind of friend who'd be there no matter what. We sat around, talking and drinking for the next few hours before I finally headed home. After dinner, I asked Karen to sit with me in the living room. I opened up about what had been bothering me. Well, most of it, some things I held back for now. Karen, I need to talk to you about something serious. I don't think you've been entirely honest with me about this writing seminar. I overheard you talking about it with your group back in March, but you never mentioned it to me until you started making plans. I even heard you say affairs are common among famous writers, and honestly, I didn't find that funny. You've been talking to Frank about this trip, but when I ask, you tell me it's someone else. You know how I feel about that guy. And when you told me you were accepted, you went out of your way to make sure I wouldn't come with you. I don't have to be there, Karen. I just wanted to share this experience with you. Instead, you've gone behind my back and set up this fishing trip to keep me far away, without even asking how I felt about it. It feels like you don't want me around while you're in Illinois. I don't think you've been completely truthful, and I'm starting to wonder if you've been entirely faithful. Karen's face hardened. Abe, I would never cheat on you. I don't know what's gotten into you. You're my husband, and all I want is for you to enjoy yourself. It hurts me to think you'd even consider that I'd do something like that. I can't control how I feel, I said softly. You know I love you. I've loved you since the day we met. But I can't ignore the thought of betrayal. I looked her in the eye. Is that what this is, Karen? Is this seminar your escape plan from our marriage? That's where the conversation ended. No understanding. No comforting words. Karen exploded, shouting at me 1 minute, giving me the silent treatment the next. For the rest of the week, silence was her weapon of choice. She thought freezing me out would break me. It didn't. If anything, it made me more certain that something was wrong. But I knew pushing her wouldn't get me anywhere. In the end, I let her believe she'd won. If she was going to cheat, there wasn't much I could do to stop it. The phone call I overheard suggested she might already have. In the end, I thanked her for the fishing trip to Canada, but the dark cloud hanging over me never lifted. Funny thing, as soon as she got what she wanted, Karen's mood shifted. Suddenly, she was affectionate, the perfect loving wife again. Almost like she was reinforcing the role I was supposed to play. It felt like Karen had flipped a switch. One moment distant and cold, the next warm and affectionate. That only deepened my suspicions. I know when I'm being manipulated. The writer's seminar in Illinois was about 500 miles away, and I didn't know a soul there. So, I asked a colleague if he knew anyone who could help in situations like this. He did. The guy he recommended was a private investigator based right in Illinois. I reached out to him. The seminar's location made things easy. It was held on a public university campus, meaning the investigator couldn't sit in on the workshops, but he could move freely around the grounds, keeping an eye on the dorms, cafeterias, and local bars where the attendees gathered. Students lived in the dorms, and some of them worked with the investigator, discreetly planting equipment and keeping tabs on things. By the end of the school year, our daughters had decided to stay at their universities for summer research programs. That left Karen and me alone in the house, just the two of us. I did everything I could to reconnect. Romantic dinners, movie nights, even day trips to places she loved. Karen seemed to enjoy it, and for a while, I believed we were making progress. But every time I told her I loved her, she responded with a distant "I know." It wasn't that she didn't love me anymore. I realized that. She just took me for granted. I had become familiar, predictable. She saw me as steady and reliable, someone who would always be there, no matter what. She felt safe enough to stray, knowing I'd still be waiting when she came back. That realization shaped my plan. On the day she left for the seminar, I couldn't stay silent. We stood at the door as her airport shuttle pulled up. I hugged her tightly and whispered, "Please don't do anything that'll destroy our marriage." Karen pulled away, rolling her eyes. "I'm tired of you not trusting me. We'll talk about this when I get back." She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, grabbed her bags, and walked to the shuttle without another glance. At that moment, I knew this marriage was already over. After 25 years, 2 kids, and countless memories, it had withered right in front of me. The private investigator did his job well. Karen and Frank didn't even try to hide it. As soon as they arrived, Karen apparently ditched her wedding ring, probably took it off on the plane. She introduced herself as recently divorced, and from day one, she and Frank were inseparable. They ate together, held hands, kissed in public like teenagers. The PI discreetly installed a small camera in the hallway of their dorm. Karen and Frank had separate rooms, but used only one. Some nights it was hers, other nights his, but they always ended up in the same bed. I didn't need video proof to know what was happening behind those doors, but the investigators' team went the extra mile to confirm it. One evening, before sunset, Karen and Frank retreated to their room early. 2 of the investigators' team members, posing as students, waited by the wall and slipped a tiny fisheye camera under the door. The camera recorded 20 minutes of footage, crystal clear, painfully vivid. Frank hadn't even bothered using protection. That was it for me. The decision was final. Our marriage was done. From that point on, whatever else they found was just icing on the cake. The investigator kept sending regular updates, but by the end of the first week, I'd made up my mind. While Karen was away enjoying her summer romance, I used the time to set my plan into motion. By the time she returned, I wouldn't be there. No explanations, no drawn-out fights, no ultimatums, just divorce papers. Love fades slowly, but without trust, love isn't enough. I couldn't imagine a future with someone who betrayed me like this. Some might say I should have confronted her, humiliated her, or worse. But that wasn't me. The law wouldn't have been on my side. And frankly, ruining my life for the sake of revenge wasn't worth it. My revenge? I was taking away the one thing she could always count on me. Frank wasn't her forever. He couldn't offer her stability or long-term comfort. Where does a divorced 50-year-old woman turn for that kind of love and emotional support? I didn't care. She wasn't my problem anymore. The PI's reports kept coming every few days. More photos, videos, and audio recordings. Each one was harder to watch than the last. The audio was the worst. Listening to them talk about me, laugh about me, made my blood boil. He keeps texting me about the fish he's caught. Thanks me every day, Karen chuckled. Frank laughed. Guy has no clue. Keep him in the dark, feed him crap, and he's happy as a mushroom. They both burst out laughing. I'll handle the nerd when I get back, Karen said dismissively. I'm tired of his accusations. How dare he not trust me? Oh, come on, Frank teased. You're just taking a break from the marriage, right? Exactly. Or maybe it's someone else's wife staying with me every night. They laughed again. Frank added, he's such an idiot. Maybe he suspects something, but I'm not dealing with it. I'm a writer, damn it. I can't let some geek hold me back with his microchips and blueprints. Karen snorted. He doesn't get it? He'll never understand what it's like to think big. I didn't need to understand her big ideas. I thought about all the different ways I could get back at Karen, but the more I considered it, the more I realized nothing would bring me satisfaction as long as my life remained entangled with hers. There was only one option left, and that was to start cutting ties. I had a candid conversation with my boss, laying everything out. He understood. He'd been through something similar not long ago. Without hesitation, he arranged a transfer for me to our office in Portland, Maine. I liked the idea. I knew the team there. Good people, professionals I respected. The town itself had always appealed to me, and I figured a change of scenery might do me some good. I hired movers to take half the furniture and all my personal belongings north. I had the car tuned up for the long drive and met with a lawyer to kick off the divorce proceedings. Financially, Karen was covered. She had her own insurance and retirement account. I removed her name from all my assets and updated my will, naming our daughters as the sole beneficiaries. I signed over the house to her in exchange for waiving alimony. Her car? She could keep it, but the insurance was her problem now. The final step, cutting off our joint accounts, would happen closer to the end. I wanted to keep my plans quiet until the last possible moment. From that point on, my focus was steel. I had to stay committed to the decision I'd made. I even kept calling Karen, asking about the seminar, telling her how much I loved and missed her. I wasn't hoping for reconciliation. I just wanted to hear the lies, to remind myself why I was doing this. She didn't disappoint. Barely 2 minutes into our conversations, she'd brush me off, always in a hurry for dinner or a lecture. The investigator later confirmed she wasn't rushing to any academic event. Frank was always there, exchanging smirks and inside jokes with her. It was all a joke to her. That was the final push I needed to stick to the plan. After that, I switched to texting her instead of calling. I didn't trust myself to keep my emotions in check during a phone call. I'd send updates about fishing trips, except I wasn't the one fishing. Jake and his wife went in my place, and they had the time of their lives. Jake made a far better choice in a spouse than I had. Before I left, I said goodbye to him. He and his wife promised to visit me in Maine. As Karen's 6-week seminar neared its end, I wrapped up the last of my affairs. A friend of mine who worked in real estate lent me a for sale sign. I couldn't legally sell the house without Karen's consent, especially since I had already signed it over to her. But she didn't know that yet. When she returned, that sign would be the first thing she saw. I changed the locks, making sure the place wouldn't feel like home when she got back. On the dining table, I laid out the evidence. A folder of carefully selected photos, explicit ones, captured by the PI's camera under Frank's door. I printed out the full investigation report and stacked it neatly beside the pictures. Most of my belongings were already gone, hauled away by the movers. They'd hold them in storage until I was ready to settle in Maine. I packed light. 2 suitcases, my briefcase, laptop, and my guitar. The guitar wasn't negotiable. I couldn't trust movers with something that important. The plan was to leave the next morning, knowing Karen wouldn't return until late at night. By the time she walked through the door, I'd be long gone. But the night before I left, I changed my mind. I wanted her to feel it. Before she even got on the plane, I sent her an email. 3 photos of her and Frank, carefully chosen. The subject line read, "I'm divorcing you. I'm divorcing you. I'm divorcing you." The first photo showed them almost dancing, pressed close, her head tilted back in laughter. Her wedding ring conspicuously absent. The second was of them holding hands, entering his dorm room together. And the third? I kept it for later. The third image was a screenshot from the video. Her face clearly visible, unmistakable. I imagined her reaction when she saw it, hoping it would ruin whatever romantic evening she and Frank had planned. I pictured them scrambling to search for hidden cameras that were long gone. Then I turned off my phone, leaving the house. Our house was painful, like ripping away a part of myself. But beneath the ache, I felt something else. Freedom. In a way, Karen was already gone. The woman I'd loved for 25 years didn't exist anymore. Somewhere along the line, she had disappeared. Maybe it wasn't me that caused it. Maybe she just faded away. The woman who wore my wife's face was a stranger now, and I had no desire to know her. I was starting over. Even through the weight of loss, I felt a strange lightness, like someone had lifted a heavy chain from my shoulders. I drove for nearly 100 miles down dark, empty highways, wrapped in thought. By the time I pulled into a small roadside inn, the night was still and quiet. I wasn't interested in some chain hotel. I wanted something real, someplace with a little history, where the owners still cooked breakfast and knew your name by morning. I found it, eventually. The next morning, over a bowl of warm corn grits, my thoughts began to shift. I'd been so focused on getting to Maine, on running from everything, that I hadn't stopped to ask why I was in such a hurry. I still had 2 weeks before my new position started. What was I racing toward? I realized I needed to slow down, to let everything sink in. I wasn't ready to start fresh just yet. I needed time to grieve the betrayal, to shake off the last pieces of my old life. So I decided to take the long way to Maine. I'd let the road stretch ahead of me, stop wherever I felt like it, and talk to the strangers I met along the way. This week wasn't just about travel. It was the space I needed to leave behind the ruins of my marriage. That afternoon, I wandered through Williamsburg with the summer tourists. I watched the craftsmen at work, the blacksmiths shaping molten iron into something beautiful. I hadn't made a reservation, but somehow, I found a room for the night. Later, over a simple dinner, my mind drifted back to Karen. She was probably home by now. I wondered how long it would take her to notice the for sale sign in the yard. How long before she realized her key wouldn't turn in the lock. I sat in a hotel room in downtown Annapolis when I finally turned my phone back on. It didn't surprise me. Voicemails, texts, and missed calls flooded the screen. Most of them were from Karen, a handful from mutual friends. I went through them all, slowly. Listening to Karen's voice wasn't easy, but I needed to hear it. At first, she tried to convince me I was wrong. It's not what you think. Sure, those messages came from Illinois, before she'd gotten home and found the photos and the PI's report. The later messages, those were different. Friends told me Karen had been reaching out to everyone she knew, desperate to track me down. But she was looking in the wrong places. Jake and his wife knew the truth. They kept my secret. The rest? I decided to keep them in the dark for now. I'd explain everything once I felt ready. I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever. But for now, I'd enjoy being a ghost. The 2 calls that truly weighed on me were from my daughters. Karen had reached out to them, trying to find out where I was. I hadn't told them about leaving their mother. I wanted to do that in person, but I couldn't let them worry unnecessarily. So I called both of them and calmly explained the situation. They were upset, shocked even. Neither of them could believe their mother was capable of something like this. I didn't sugarcoat it. I sent them the same photos and the private investigator's report that I had sent Karen. I wanted them to have the full picture, no matter how painful it was. Afterward, they promised not to reveal anything to their mother. One missed call stood out: my lawyer. When I got back to him, he informed me that Karen had been served the divorce papers. She knew I wasn't bluffing now. There was another twist. Frank's wife had also received a full package of photos, videos, and audio recordings from the seminar. A little karmic justice for him. On the 3rd day of my road trip, I crossed into northern Maryland, feeling lighter with every mile. By the time I reached New Jersey, I barely slowed down, continuing into Connecticut. There I let myself wander. The coastal towns, with their old clapboard houses and winding streets, felt nothing like North Carolina. It was exactly what I needed. New places, new energy, far removed from the shadows of betrayal. That morning, I woke up knowing the hardest part of this journey lay ahead. After a breakfast of eggs, bacon, and strong black coffee, I set out for Brown University to meet Claire, my eldest. I arrived by late morning. Claire postponed our conversation for a while, eager to give me a tour of campus first. I let her, figuring she needed time to process everything. For a few hours, she could pretend things were normal. She introduced me to her friends, kind and thoughtful kids, exactly the kind of people I'd hoped she'd surround herself with. Before we left the dining hall, I pulled aside Claire's roommate. "She's having a rough day," I said quietly. "Could you keep an eye on her for me?" "Of course, Mr. Baker. She told us everything last night. We're here for her." My daughter had chosen her friends wisely. Later, we sat in her dorm room for hours talking. I showed her the photos and let her listen to the recordings, things no father should ever have to share with his child. Her emotions swung between grief and anger. "I can't believe Mom did this. Is she even the same woman who raised me?" Claire asked, voice shaking. "What kind of person has she turned into?" I sighed. "Claire, no matter what she's done, she's still your mother. And remember, she betrayed me, not you." She shot me a look that pierced straight through me. "Sorry, Dad, but she destroyed my family. This isn't just about you." She was right. We spent the day talking, unpacking the weight of everything that had happened. That evening, I took Claire and her friends out to dinner, the best spot in town that fit within my budget. Over steaks and pasta, I told them stories from my college years. It wasn't just to entertain them. I wanted to remind them to hold on to what they had. Family, love, and friendships, fragile things that could be shattered if not protected. That night, I stayed in a nearby hotel. The next morning, Claire and I had breakfast together. She cried when I hugged her goodbye. I drove north to Boston, where Denise was waiting. By the time I arrived at her dorm, Claire had clearly filled her in. Denise's reaction was more muted, less shocked, but the disappointment was there. Still, she wanted to see the evidence for herself. I showed her the photos. We sat quietly, the weight of it settling between us. Then, as if on cue, Karen called. I gave Denise a quick shake of my head, frantically waving my hand in a cut-it-off gesture. She got the message. Denise had always been the more level-headed one in the family. But what she did next stunned me. She picked up the call. "Mom, Dad was here last night," Denise said, voice flat. "Is it true? Are you the kind of woman who cheats on her husband and lies about it? Are you seeing multiple people?" I froze. I wanted to scold her, tell her to respect her mother, but I couldn't. Because it was true. I heard Karen's muffled voice on the other end. Denise's expression didn't change. "You heard me, Mom," Denise repeated. Denise's words hit harder than anything I could have said. "You spent 6 weeks with another man while Dad was home alone. Was it worth it, Mom? Was losing your marriage worth it?" Wow. My daughter knew how to cut deep. Denise told me later that Karen broke down crying, fumbling through excuses, but she wasn't buying any of it. That evening, I took Denise and her friends to a Thai restaurant near campus. Like her sister, Denise had chosen her friends well. The atmosphere was lighthearted, and the dinner passed pleasantly. On the drive back, one of her friends piped up. "Mr. Baker, Denise told us what you're going through. She was in rough shape last night, but we try to cheer her up. You should come back sometime. We'll take you to our dining hall." The group burst into laughter. "Or maybe somewhere a little better," another friend added, prompting more jokes. The rest of the ride was filled with laughter, and for the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. I found a hotel for the night, had breakfast with Denise the next morning, and set off on the 7th day of my journey. Leaving Boston, I knew I was just a couple of hours from Portland, but instead of driving straight there, I let the road lead me west toward the White Mountains. I wasn't ready to face my new reality just yet. By the afternoon, I found myself climbing Mount Washington by rail, standing at the summit and staring across the peaks and valleys. The cool wind whipped against my jacket, an almost Arctic breeze that felt strange for August. But in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. For the first time, I stood alone and felt steady. The weight of betrayal, regret, and heartbreak lifted, at least for a little while. This was a new beginning. The next morning, I treated myself to pancakes drenched in real maple syrup before getting back on the road. By midday, I rolled into Portland. I decided to drop by the office and let my new boss know I had arrived. I already knew half the staff, and they greeted me warmly. Henry, my new boss, gathered everyone around to introduce me officially. I expected a quick office tour, but by the end of the day, we were standing around Henry's backyard grill, watching steaks sizzle over open flames. I figured we'd hit a seafood place, considering I was now in Maine, but Henry had different plans. "This is more about good company than lobster," he said, cracking open a local IPA. The evening was filled with laughter and stories. Inevitably, someone asked what brought me from North Carolina to Maine. I told them the truth. I left out the gritty details but shared enough that they understood. I ended with a simple request. I might be a little off the next few weeks. I'm not usually like this, but there's a lot I'm working through. If I start acting strange, just let me know, call me out if needed. I appreciate honesty. The room fell quiet for a second. Then, without warning, every woman at the table hugged me, pressing soft kisses to my cheek. Every man gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "We're here for you, Abe," Henry said. That was all they said, and it was all I needed to hear. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I turned my phone back on. Messages from Claire and Denise popped up first. Their words were full of love and support. I noticed several texts from unfamiliar numbers. It turned out Denise and Claire had shared my number with their friends. They thanked me for dinner and let me know they'd be there for my daughters. Good kids. Some of my old friends had been trying to reach me as well. I decided it was time to call each of them back and explain what happened. I didn't tell them where I was just yet. That could wait. But I told them why I left. A few of them struggled to believe it at first. I sent them the same 3 photos I had sent Karen. I had more evidence, but honestly, I didn't feel any reason to shield Karen from the fallout of her actions. I tried. I really did, but protecting her hadn't worked. Let the truth take its course. I received messages of love and support from every friend I reached out to, each one assuring me they were there if I needed them. It became clear that my plan to become a ghost was nothing more than a fantasy. Too many people cared, and, as much as I once wanted to disappear, I was grateful for it. As I sifted through Karen's remaining messages and voicemails, I noticed a shift. Eventually, she admitted to everything, but her confession came wrapped in strange bursts of anger, somehow twisting the blame back onto me. In Karen's mind, her actions were justified. She said I smothered her, that I worked too much, that I made her feel trapped. She even had the nerve to suggest nothing serious happened with Frank. They were just messing around. I almost laughed out loud when she tried to convince me she was just searching for creative inspiration. Apparently, the affair was my fault too. Karen accused me of turning our daughters against her, as if her own actions hadn't done that already. When she finally ran out of excuses, I laid it out plainly. She chose Frank over me. She resisted every effort I made to save our marriage. She cheated, and now she was facing the consequences. I didn't care why she did it anymore. By the time I hung up, she was still crying and scrambling for forgiveness, but it didn't matter. I knew too much. There was no going back. I found a simple but charming 2-bedroom apartment in an old brick building near the office. I'd originally thought of it as a temporary fix, but something about the smaller space, the freedom of not worrying about a house, appealed to me. I even toyed with the idea of buying a small coastal cottage as a weekend retreat. Why stop there? I thought I'd be living a solitary life. But I was wrong. In fact, I spend more time with my daughters now than I did when I lived with Karen. Claire and Denise visit at least once a month, often bringing friends along. For 36 hours, my apartment feels alive with their energy, and I cook them big dinners. When they leave, I crave the quiet, but I miss them the moment they're gone. To my surprise, a few of my old friends have already made trips up to visit me, with others planning to come once the weather warms. I live alone, but I don't feel lonely. I've met new friends through work and hobbies. The sailing community here is active, and I've met a few interesting women, though I keep things light and respectful until the divorce is finalized. Even after all this time, Karen still reaches out occasionally. She never fully apologizes, always downplaying what happened. Everyone does it, she says. It doesn't mean anything, but it does. Loyalty means something. So does betrayal. At first, I thought about trying to explain this to her, but what's the point? My life isn't fully separate from hers. Our daughters and mutual friends ensure some level of connection. But being 1,000 miles away means I no longer live with the daily sting of rejection. Karen used to be the center of my world, but somewhere along the line, I stopped being the center of hers. Now I'm charting my own path. And to be honest, there are silver linings to this whole mess. I love life in Maine. This is my first winter up here. And while it's a shock compared to North Carolina, I know I'll manage. If everyone else can handle it, so can I. I started looking for a boat. I found a marina nearby with available slips, and I can't wait for spring. Working on rigging, varnishing, tying knots. It feels like a new beginning. The food's fantastic, the local breweries are even better, and the people? Genuine. I have hope that life will turn out all right. Is my heart fully healed? Not yet. But time is a way of patching things up. Oh, and by the way, Frank's wife? Turns out she's just as old-fashioned as I am. She kicked him out and filed for divorce. And the kicker? Neither Karen nor Frank has published a single thing since that seminar. Funny how that worked out. Thank you for sticking with me through this story. I'd love to hear what you think. Was I right to leave? Would you have handled things differently? Subscribe to our channel because there will be many more similar videos. See you soon.